Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this commentary on Resident Evil Survivor. I'm your host, Kruger, and before we get started and delve into this, if you would prefer to watch this video without any commentary over it, there will be a link in the information bar down below in the hyperlink section that will take you to the exact same video just about my commentary. I'm going to do my best not to talk over the cutscenes, so you'll hear again from me in a moment.
In 1998, a disaster struck the quiet Midwestern residents of Raccoon City. An uncontrollable outbreak of the Umbrella-created T-virus transformed the city into an inescapable death trap. To stop the outbreak from spreading, Umbrella Incorporated was forced to wipe out the entire city. However, this was not the only location where an outbreak occurred.
Where am I? Oh! I don't remember anything. Who am I?
So we start this game in a manner that many games of the era do, a literary device where our character doesn't know who we are, so it puts the player in a position where they have the exact same amount of information as the person they are playing as. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this setup, but there are a number of issues with the story going forward that I'll point out.
You look familiar, but... but I just can't remember. Mark Thompson, huh? Though I can't remember anything, I know that this was no way for anyone to die. What?
And almost immediately we come to the first one I have. So we do not remember who we are, our protagonist. We don't remember anything about us other than the fact that we have a gun. So presumably we don't remember any of the memories from birth up until this point in his life. Yet the first time we come across a zombie, you know to shoot it straight away. And this is a bit of a disconnect between the player and the character. I feel as if the player going into this game is fully aware of what Resident Evil stands for and knows when they see a zombie to shoot it, whereas the character in that situation probably wouldn't react in that manner. Now, you probably just noticed there that there was a bit of slowdown. I do apologise for that. This is, I believe, the second walkthrough I created, and at the time I was actually running this on a laptop as opposed to the PC I have now. All of my walkthroughs, if they are based on games that are only found in console form are run through emulators, just because it's a lot more convenient for me. I honestly wouldn't know where to begin to record something connected to the TV, and it's a lot of faff. It's a bit of a legal grey area, as far as I'm aware, when it comes to emulators. Provided you get the BIOS from a console that you own yourself, and you own physical copies of all the games you use, then I believe it's technically okay. I just want to put that out there for anyone who's looking to dabble in it, because it is a bit sketchy in certain areas. I know it's kind of a talking point at the moment. And all of the files I'm going to come across for all of the Resident Evil walkthroughs that I've done, I tend just to skim through them quite quickly because I didn't want to get bogged down. I spent a lot of time trying to debate whether I should leave enough time there to read it in normal time, or for those who wanted to read it, give them the opportunity to pause the video, and for the rest just kind of skim through. So if you are interested in the documents there, you can pause them to read them at your leisure, or if you put the video to 0.25 and you're quite a quick speed reader, you can do that as well. The files are usually much better in Resident Evil games than the quality of the voice acting and the lines of the voice acting. I find Resident Evil Survivor is kind of an exception to that. Both the dialogue and voice acting and the written manuscripts you come across are both equally terrible. I'll show a few more a little bit as we go into it, but yeah, they're not the best written. A lot of the language they use just comes across as very abnormal, and I don't know if part of that is a translation issue. Maybe it meant something a bit different in Japan, and transferring it over to English, maybe they couldn't get the exact term, or perhaps they didn't really have the budget, because back in the 90s video games weren't the multi-billion-dollar industry they are. I mean, I don't know how much they're worth. I imagine they probably were worth billions, but not the absolutely ludicrous amount they are today. Now, it may not have been too obvious from what we've seen so far, but this game has multiple paths. When we got the key from the first zombie that we kill, there's actually 3 different routes that we can take, and it was purely by just contrivance that I chose this route. I believe the intention was for people to come back to play through the game multiple times, and there is several different paths you can go through at different sections of the game, which is quite commendable. Unfortunately, for a game this short, I mean, I'm sure you can see how long this video is. It's only 1 hour and 20 minutes, which is noticeably shorter than all the other games. Bearing in mind, the other Resident Evil games usually take between 9 to 10 hours if you don't know what you're doing, but can usually be speed run much quicker than that. I know my walkthroughs, I'm not particularly speed running it, but I am being quite efficient with as I go about things, and they clock in anywhere between 2 to 3.5 hours. This game doesn't have any puzzles to stump you. It's pretty much just a straight through, so there's never going to be any points where you're backtracking or moving around. It's pretty much just an A to B, and for something like that to be so short in length, whilst I can commend the effort that they've put some little bits in here to try and have multiple pathways and to try and increase replay value, for a game as short as this, it probably would have been better if they just made it linear so there was more content for one playthrough. In my opinion.
Vincent.
Who is this? Vincent? Who's that? Wait. Am I Vincent?
Vincent, you are a murderer. A murderer.
A murderer? What are you talking about? Answer me. Who did I kill?
So another bit of top-notch voice acting we've come to know and love about the old Resident Evil games. Now, the path you choose at the start doesn't really impact much. It's just a few different bits that you can go through. The path you choose here, however, does impact a weapon that you'll be getting imminently.
Who are you?
What are you talking about, Vincent?
What did you call me?
Please, Don't kill me. Helicopter? Vincent, this is all your fault. You made them send those cleaners to destroy this place.
Cleaners? What do you mean? Wait!
Now I believe there are either 4 or 5 different handguns you can get throughout this game. You start off with handgun A, and every single handgun has unlimited ammunition, but the amount of damage they contain and their rate of fire will differ. And I go for this handgun in here very specifically.
What?
It's such a shame that you must die here, Vincent. After all, this is the type of place where a cold-blooded murderer should die.
So we're locked in this room with a hunter enemy, which you may remember from the original Resident Evil, and they also showed up in the third one. What I'm trying to do here is to peek around the corners to see if I can get a clear shot rather than just running out at him. They're quite dangerous enemies, although admittedly the enemies in Survivor are much easier to deal with than in other games due to the first person nature of it. And this is another big point of it, which is probably my biggest issue I have with the game. For about 95% of the enemies you come across, provided you have your back turned to them, they cannot hurt you. So have you come across any zombie dogs, or Cerberus as I believe they are called in the game, if you turn your back to them, even if they're doing a leaping attack, they cannot hit you. And it's a really fundamental problem with the game design, I feel. And there's a lot of reasons why I think this is. Just before I get to that, however, the handgun we've just picked up, Handgun D, is my absolute favourite handgun for this game. It has the lowest rate of fire and the highest damage per shot. Now I'm not sure if that translates to the highest damage per second, although it certainly feels like it. And considering you get unlimited handgun ammunition, and this is kind of a stepgap between the traditional handgun and a magnum, it's actually suitable to last you the entire game. In fact, you could probably beat the whole game with relative ease using just this gun. The lack of melee in this game, I imagine, is due to the difficulty in implementing a melee system in a first-person game. It's something that they did succeed later on. I know with the Umbrella Chronicles on the Nintendo Wii, you could use knives if enemies got up close and personal, but for the longest time with these Survivor type games or gun type games, I know they did one for Resident Evil Code Veronica as well, there wasn't a means to use a melee weapon in first person. I believe that's correct for the other game, don't quote me on that. But especially for the time, I'm not sure if it's a case of they didn't know how to implement it, or if it's a case that they didn't care, to be honest, because there's a lot about this game which might not necessarily scream cash grab, but certainly screams B-team, or a game where not the greatest amount of effort was put into. And you can see it in the visuals alone. The character models here are all taken directly from the Resident Evil 2 zombies. And you can tell this because Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3, although they came out in the late 90s and gameplay wise they're relatively uniform, the models for the zombies differ quite a lot. In the first one they tend to wear lab coats, they tend to be a lot more bland in colour. In the second one they look, well, as they look here, and in the third one they had a lot more, I'm not sure the correct term because I don't dabble in that kind of work, but each zombie seemed to have a lot more components to it that moved. Part of this was because you could deal more damage. In the third one you could blow legs off, you could blow arms off, you could blow them in half with grenade launchers. Whereas in the first two, as far as I'm aware, the only kind of dismemberment you could do was blowing heads off. So they had a lot more, I believe I'm correct in saying, polygons in the third one's models to allow for such dismemberment to occur. So they have a very unique style compared to the first two ones. Now, as we had mentioned earlier, if we have our back to something, we can't get hurt. But they can still push us, and that was us being pushed to the side of the wall as we tried to run out by a number of insects. It's again, it's something that I find quite disjointing. I find it definitely takes a hit to the aura of disbelief I have when a creature's more interested in rugby tackling me than attacking me. It doesn't quite add up, does it? But as we move through the sewers, we are going to come across a diary which is going to prelude somewhat what comes up, and this is in fact the diary of the janitor who locked us in the room with the hunter. And if you take the time to pause and read through this, you'll see exactly what I mean by the terminology and the words used. It's very amateurish at times.
Picture. No. This is me. I am Vincent. It was all my fault. Who are you?
Wait. Please don't kill me. I didn't know anything about you then.
Stop.
This is another issue again. I mean, I'm probably harping on about the story a lot more than the gameplay, and I do apologise that, but it's something that really irks me. We are meant to believe that our character is suffering from retrograde amnesia, so he is unable to remember anything that happened before a specific time, or maybe specific memories. Retrograde amnesia is absolutely something that occurs in real life. However, we are led to believe that he does not know who he is. He is unaware of his life, he's unaware of his role, he's unaware of his career. Yet without ever seeing a mirror, we find a picture of ourselves and we automatically know it's us. Now, if we cannot remember our entire life from birth to this point, why do we now remember what we look like, where surely we wouldn't have that information? And not only that, but a big part of remembering one's memories is our memories are much like a spider diagram in certain ways. If you were to see a picture of yourself and recognize that that picture was of yourself, then for it not to trigger any other memories to relating of who you are, I find highly unbelievable. And it's not technically impossible, but it's one of those contrivances that just seem way too convenient for the plot of the game to occur. So yeah, it's not something that's impossible. Absolutely it can happen, but it's just such a huge coincidence that you're left going, And again, it takes a big hit to your suspension of disbelief. Now I suppose that now is a good time as any, as I've run out of random topics to talk about, to talk a little bit about the history of this game and why it has such a strange design. This game was actually always intended for light gun support. It wasn't meant to be played with a controller. You were meant to have one of those old light guns that you plug into the PlayStation, and it was, you know, back in the day when it was meant to be kind of like a you know, bring the arcade to your home type era. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened in Japan. However, this game came out, I believe, either shortly after or around about the time of the Columbine high school massacre in America. And it was also the time where video games were kind of seen as a scapegoat. They were being vilified for the mass shootings in America. You know, not the fact that children can have access to weapons easily, but I'm not going to go into the politics of that. But video games were blamed for a lot of violence and a lot of problems at the time. As far as I'm aware, to date, there has only ever been inconclusive evidence to that. I believe there have been some studies that have shown a marked link in aggression, but the methodology used in those experiments did not reflect real-world applications all that well. And for every time I have come across some kind of study that's stated that, there is always an equal or often greater number of studies that show that playing violent video games actually has a cathartic effect, being able to relieve those urges, being able to relieve those problems. And from everything that I've seen, the vast majority of people who do enjoy games like this and don't turn out like that, it seems far more likely, from my perspective, that the people that do these crimes have something else that's wrong with them, and they are drawn to violent games as a part of that, not necessarily that the violent games caused it, or even considering they've become so popular in our generation in mainstream culture, the fact that you play a video game, it's like saying, oh, he went to the cinema sometimes. It's so nebulous that I have a hard time believing the idea that a shooting game is going to cause you to be a shooter. I mean, there might be certain exceptions to that, certain games that are very specific, but even then I would argue the cathartic part is probably a lot greater. But again, I don't have the research papers in front of me. I'm not going to go into that too much. Already gone off way too big of a tangent, so I'll try and get back to the game. I do apologise. So we come across our shotgun in here. It's our first weapon that does require ammunition to use, and as such you're going to see I don't use it all that much. The handgun we have here is so effective at dealing with so many enemies that it's only in a few select situations that we're going to have the need to use it. The hunters, which if I'm not mistaken will be in this courtyard here, I'm not actually entirely sure where the model for the hunters comes from. Almost everything else in this game comes from the second one. However, unless my memory is serving me wrong, because I think they might have been in either the fourth Survivor or the Tofu minigame at the end, but in the main game they were not present. The hunters were pretty much replaced with lickers. So I do not know if the models used here were ripped from the first game and modified, or if they were actually made specifically from this game, because there are hunters in the third one, but they look noticeably different from the ones here. So, you know, I probably should have done my research a little bit better before going through it, but I simply don't have the information there. Now, as we descend the rope here, we come across our first Tyrant. And for those of you familiar with the series, the Tyrant... God, I can't shoot today. The Tyrant was... I say today, this was recorded bloody years ago, but you understand the semantics of the point I'm trying to say. The Tyrant was... Well, this particular Tyrant, Tyrant X, was introduced in the second one, although there was a Tyrant at the end of the first game. And the general lore behind the Resident Evil games, if you can call a game like this lore, because the writing is thoroughly B-grade, is that there is a pharmaceutical company known as Umbrella that is doing all kinds of biological experiments in the attempt of creating the perfect biological weapon, which you can see it being said in a cheesy movie or in a cheesy Japanese movie or an anime. It's when they tried to make the Resident Evil movies in I believe it was Hollywood, I know it starred Mia Jovovich, when they tried to make those, it was just so insanely cringy. But yeah, they want to create a biological weapon, and they don't just want to create monsters for the sake of creating monsters. They want to create monsters that they can control, so they can send them in to certain areas and basically act instead of humans. They are BOWs, as they're known as, biological organic weapons. Something.
Umbrella. So this is where the city is controlled from. Oh. What's happening to me?
Now, I cannot confirm this because I sadly have not yet played the Persona series, but I have it on good authority that the nightclub we've just standing in front of as you picked up this red herb is a reference to one of those games. I've been told this by my friend. I can't tell you more than that, I'm afraid. But yeah, here we are at the Umbrella research facility or base or company or whatever this is meant to be. And I've had a brain fart. Yes, the tyrants that we came across in the second game, the reason they're wearing large trench coats is that they are supposed to be bulletproof trench coats, and Umbrella created them, and I believe they've inserted some kind of module into either their spine and their neck or their brain so that they can be controlled. And in the second game they were tasked with cleanup operations to take out assets problematic to Umbrella, anything that could uncover them. And then in the third game you have Nemesis, which is a very specific tyrant tasked with taking down the Stars Alpha team. Or the remaining members of Stars, not just Stars Alpha team, just Stars in general. We see them here because, as far as I'm aware, this is meant to be the facility where they are being created from. And so they come up quite frequently, which is something I take some umbrage with, not just the reused assets, but the manner in which they use them.
Hello? Can you hear me? Who are you? What are you doing? Answer me!
Now, what I mean by having a problem with them is that actually I shouldn't be talking because a cutscene is about to occur. Hold that thought. Oh, he doesn't talk. Well, you know, bugger me then. The Tyrant in the second one was very much what Resident Evil 3 was in its entirety. This looming presence, this tall, dark, horrifying figure that will stalk you down and chase you down anywhere, it will follow you everywhere. And it created a sense of paranoia. You never quite knew when he was going to show up, when he was going to appear, and it's something that I love. For a survival horror game, to have an enemy that you never feel you are capable of taking out, because even if you can take it out, it takes so many bullets that you might screw yourself up later. And so especially the first few times you're playing the second and third games, whenever you come across the tyrants, the natural inclination is to get the hell away. And that is so brilliant for a game that gives you weapons. Despite the fact that you are armed, you still don't feel safe. This game kind of screws that up. The fact that you have unlimited ammunition means that it's never a problem. And it's just kind of emblematic of the game design as a whole. This was meant to be more of an action survival horror, the kind of thing that Resident Evil 4 would go on to define. But they didn't quite know what they were going for, at least that's what it seems like to me. You have the slower paced parts of the Resident Evil game. You move quite slowly, there's not a huge amount of enemies, but there is a noticeably bigger amount of enemies than you would come off in the other games. And whenever you come across them, although you are certainly free to run around them, as I have done at a few points here and there, it almost feels like you're encouraged to just shoot everything, like the game wants you to do that and treat it as an action game. And it can feel a bit mixed match with this juxtaposition where half of the game seems to be telling you to stay alive and run away, and the other half is just saying fuck it, just shoot everything. And it doesn't quite know what tone it's trying to go for.
What?
Vincent? It's me, your mother.
My mother?
Vincent, please. Listen to your mother. I want you to leave Umbrella. I want you to stop performing those terrible crimes and just come back home.
Don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. What is the tape you're listening to?
I don't know. I was only listening to it because I'm so bored. My brother told me to wait here. Oh, let me go!
Your brother? down. I won't harm you. I promise.
Liar. You'll kill me if I drop it. I'm not stupid. Now stay back. Don't come any closer.
I know you think that I'm a murderer, but you're wrong. I would never do anything like that.
Now, if you missed it, I urge you to go back and rewatch that cutscene, and just look at how Lot runs when defending Lily. He moves 3 feet, yet takes about 10 steps in a sprinting formation. Now, I know, again, I'm harking on with the storyline more than I should do, but it really irks me. So, first of all, as far as we are aware from our protagonist's point of view, we don't remember what's happened. However, everything that's led up to this point leads us to believe that we are this Vincent character, and that we are responsible for a large number of deaths and experimentation and just generally fucked up shit. So why, when our own character at this point believes he's a murderer, would he tell Lot, I am not a murderer, I would never do something like that? You could make the argument he's trying to calm him down, but we've already seen that he seems to know who we are. And if he's scared of us for that, how is that going to change anything? Is it just, you know, dialogue thrown in there for the sake of being in there without too much thought? In the same way as Lily is in this institute and has been told by her brother, just stay here. And rather than saying, oh, I was just looking through the computers and the recordings to try and find something to help us out, she says, I'm just here because I'm so bored. You're on an island surrounded by zombies, surrounded by murderers, not murderers, monsters. Every adult, apart from what, like 1 or 2, is dead. Everything's fucked. You should be shitting yourself. And you say, I'm just looking at this because I'm so bored. And you could chalk it up to the child being in shock and just know what to say, but it just seems like a really weird line. It doesn't come across as natural. And also the thing that she was listening to is placed there purely to, again, try and solidify the fact that our character is this murderer that he believes us to be. I'm sure it was all the rage in the 90s to have these kind of twist and shock endings, but to think of it logically and to why that recording's there, Vincent, as we know, is, if not the commander of this island, then at least a pretty big shot there. He has affiliations with Umbrella, and considering Umbrella is basically performing eugenics, which is insanely illegal, you would think if you were working for them that you would try anything you can, or there would be several stipulations in your contract to make sure you don't leak that information outside. In fact, we see that in the first game. A lot of the researchers are unable to go and see their families. We see it from the diaries. They can't leave because they're not allowed to. No matter how many people die, no matter how much shit gets fucked up, if they try to leave, they'll be executed. Why then would Vincent tell his mother, not only does he work for the Umbrella Corporation, but he is responsible for performing eugenics experiments, for killing people, for committing crimes? Why would you tell a loved one that when you know it could place both of you in jeopardy? Unless the counter argument is the fact that he didn't tell her, she just found out about it otherwise. In which case, why in the wider scope of things do only the STARS members and like 1 journalist in Raccoon City seem to know what's going on, or that Umbrella was behind it? It was only after an entire town got wiped out that people were able to pin it on Umbrella, and even after it got wiped out, it was still going for a while. It was present in Code Veronica. None of this makes sense, and I know I'm being a dead horse, but you know, I shouldn't be taking games like this storyline seriously, but it really pisses me off. It's so nonsensical. None of it makes sense. We have 2 children. One of them, I mean, what? They're somewhere between the ages of 8 to 15, we're going to say. Probably not even that old. island full of monsters, and they are running from point to point. We have to go from point to point with guns, kill multiple monsters, deal with multiple problems, and they run through as if it doesn't even exist. And it's something that really irks me with a lot of the earlier Resident Evil games. The characters do not seem to be aware of the situation they were in. Whenever they talk to other people, they make really bizarre jokes, and it's fine to have a dark sense of humour or to joke about something because shit's so fucked up, but it never comes across like that. And I know part of it was they couldn't get good voice actors at the time, but I don't think it's that, because the lines don't even mention the shit that they're in. If I woke up with no memories, if I'd fallen out of a helicopter crash and by some miracle I hadn't died, and there's zombies and monsters everywhere, you think you would question it. But this character and most of the characters in the earlier games, probably up until the third one, take it in their stride as if it's just a normal Tuesday. And a lot of people say, I love the classic Resident Evils because, you know, it's really campy and it knows it. Like, I think even Yahtzee will say, oh, Resident Evil 4, or maybe it was Jim Sterling, but Resident Evil 4 is campy and it knows it, and that's why I love it. I don't think Resident Evil is aware it's campy. I honestly think Japan and the company tried to take it dead seriously, and it's just the lie we've told ourselves to try and make it seem like they're not completely out of touch with reality.
Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. Where's your brother Lot?
Please, you have to save my brother. He said he's going to the factory by the ropeway.
Factory?
He told me that he could find a way to escape from this place inside the factory. But there are tons and tons of scary monsters there. I know that if he goes there, he's going to be killed.
What?
Please! We've already lost Mum and Dad. You've got to help my brother. Please!
I promise. Don't cry anymore, Lily. I may have been a bad person, but that was before. That's not who I am now. I will save these two kids. I swear it. Lily, you hide here. I'll go find your brother and then come back for you.
So many contradictions in such a short span of time. So thankfully Lily finally does address the fact that there are monsters everywhere, and his brother, if you're going to run into a facility full of them with nothing but a baseball bat, you're liable to get your head chewed off. But then why was she so blasé about it 5 minutes? It just mentioned that she'd lost her mum and dad, and I presume they may have even had to witness their parents being killed by monsters. So why was she listening to audio tapes because she was bored? Would she not be in a catatonic state at this point? Would she not be, I don't know, not referring to audiobooks and listening to random crap because I was so bored? It's, I don't know. We're just going to say these kids are crazy and move on with it. But again, another contradiction. Our main protagonist has now just said, I may have been a bad person before, but I'm not like that now. Complete 180 to what he said less than 5 minutes ago. It's almost as if the two scenes, that when they were created, they didn't understand that the other scene was existing, or maybe something was cut out, or the writer had done a shit ton of mushrooms beforehand. There's not, I mean, I know John Romero's famous for saying that storyline in games like porn is expected to be there, but it's not important, which I don't believe is the case. Maybe in '93 for the type of games, but not modern day. But just because it's not important doesn't mean that you should just literally barf up a script and just say, hey, that's good, it doesn't make any sense, but fuck it. Like, Like Silent Hill, oh god, I'm going to get my dates wrong now. I'm fairly certain Silent Hill had already come out before this time. And I'm pretty sure Metal Gear Solid as well was around the same time. So it's not like good storylines. Okay. It's not like engaging storylines weren't a thing back then, but I'm tangenting entirely. So we are about halfway through the game at this point, and I've noticed that most Resident Evil games seem to follow a 3-act structure. The first third is usually in some kind of traditional location, either a city or a house or a mansion, which is usually just filled with run-of-the-mill zombies and the kind. It's the introduction to stuff that isn't quite Japanese yet, and I say that in the term of Japanese as in the kind of crazy shit that Evangelion goes into, as in, you know, going full Japanese. And then you have the second act, which is stepping it up, and it's usually either a tunnel system or sewers, such as in Resident Evil 2, or some kind of transition period from the first area to the next area. And then the third part of the game is usually take place in some kind of research facility, even an abandoned secret lab or something of that nature, which inevitably will have its self-destruct sequence activated and the whole thing will blow up. In like 90% of Resident Evil games, it's the exact same free structure, which I'm not saying is bad, because what's important is the gameplay. I know more modern games in the genre, more modern titles such as Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake has certainly done a lot to help buck the trend, but for the time being, when you brought a game like this, that's what you're going in expecting. So the hunters here, despite being formidable opponents in most other entries in the franchise, aren't that bad. In fact, most of the enemies in this game aren't that bad. Even with the handgun, you just shoot away. Again, the fact you have unlimited ammunition, I think, is a big part of this. The combat was never particularly difficult in the Resident Evil games, and in fact I don't think it was until the third one when they introduced combat roles and dodging and all this crazy shit that they really stepped up, and that game is so much harder than the first two for it, and it's why it's my absolute favourite of the originals. But here I would have liked it if there was a case where you run out of bullets and you just fucked then. You know, you can't fight back because you can't fight back, and it forced you to be conservative. But again, it's what I was talking about earlier about kind of the dual nature. It doesn't know if it wants to be a horror game, it doesn't know if it wants to be an action game, and it kind of ends up in this weird place in between the two. And one thing that really irks me about the character in this, and it's one thing that I think I don't want to say devalues the storylines of the others, but makes you see it in a new light, is that our character here doesn't remember anything. He suffered a head injury to cause an amnesia, so he's not in great physical condition. And yet he has far greater ease at dispatching any of these creatures than anyone else we've seen before. In fact, there's a section coming up which you sadly won't see because I didn't choose that route, because that route is, for lack of a more nuanced term, bullshit. You fall down a hole and you have to face 5 tyrants coming at you, and there's not much space to maneuver. But our character is capable of taking on 5 tyrants when Star's team struggle to take on 1. It's one of those where it just doesn't seem consistent in its own universe. I'm fine with it being crazy because there is some crazy shit, but this game struggles to be consistent in the Resident Evil universe, and the enemies here are yet another example from that. What do we know about the Umbrella Corporation? Okay, we know that their ultimate goal is to create biological weapons, the ultimate life form to be used as weapons, to be sold, or later on in the series they start to be sold on the black market. You can make a huge amount of profit for something that is effective like that. And if you read a lot of the journals and a lot of the lore in the background, they have very few problems creating monsters. They have very few problems creating creatures. The hardest thing and the biggest problem they have is controlling them. And it's why the tyrants were seen as the breakthrough. You have these incredibly strong creatures that can take commands, but they can only take simple commands. You know, they're not capable of talking. Even Nemesis was only capable of saying stars and occasionally. Yet we have in this game what's known as the Streetsweepers, and it's something that I think is detrimental to the series as a whole, because we never see them again. They seem to be weird gorilla type creatures that they're not fully human, because they make some kind of weird noise. They have elongated arms and they have green blood, but they are smart enough to wear armor, to wear gas masks, to use advanced weaponry, and as we saw running through that section just then, they even have snipers of them. If you have already developed a fighting force that's capable of doing that, why don't you just use them, and why do we never see them again? And it's one of the things that kind of bugs me with this game. I know Resident Evil is kind of a batshit insane series anyway, so trying to ask for a little bit of consistency is probably not the greatest idea, but they already have a force. They have their own, Umbrella has their own private militia with the street sweepers, but we don't see them again. In fact, the next time we see anyone using weapons, it's when we have the parasites from Resident Evil 4, and they're now being controlled as a parasite rather than a virus. They're now being hosted. We never see them again, but surely they would be effective. I mean, they're insanely easy in this game. They go down in a single handgun D-shot, but lore-wise, if you could organize a force to do this, I mean, we see them rappelling down from helicopters. I don't know if it's the same creatures that are piloting. Maybe you have a human pilot and then they get sent down, but in that case, then they are intelligent enough not to attack their masters. They are capable of commands, and you can send them in without risk to humans. That seems insanely useful. Why not just fit them out with better armor and use them? Like...
What?
Yeah, I feel as if they were introduced because it was an action game. It was a first-person shooter. So they were like, okay, we need to include more shooting enemies, because that's what's traditionally done. Because, you know, people love hit scan enemies. Absolutely love them. It, in my eyes, would have been much better if they created some kind of BOW, some kind of creature that was capable of attacking at ranged, so they were a threat to you, but not using sophisticated weapons. Maybe some kind of messed up half toad, half snake hybrid that shot venom at you. A projectile that you could dodge, which would, you know, be far more useful, because no one fucking loves hit scan enemies. They're crap. And it would fit the theme far greater of being monstrous enemies that you have to deal with, not monkeys in suits with guns, which I always had a really hard time taking seriously. Now, this is one of the few times when I believe the Tyrant X is used to good effect. The main reason he was always a threat in the second game wasn't necessarily that he's a difficult enemy. I mean, he just lumbers after you like he's Mike Myers. And he's intimidating for certain to see this great big lump walking after you, but he was a threat because he always cornered you in tight corridors. So you were usually faced with the choice of trying to maneuver him or to try and run past him in a tight corridor, which meant you would either get hit or have to deal with him. So it becomes a risk reward. Do you sacrifice some of your health? Not risk reward, sorry. It becomes a choice, that's the word I'm looking for. Do you sacrifice some of your health, or do you sacrifice some of your ammunition to get past this obstacle? And in a few select cases you could lure him into wider areas to move around, but you actually had to use your brain. And it's great here. As you saw, I had no way of getting past him without using more advanced weaponry. It was forcing me to use some of my consumable ammunition. And the best way I found was to use a grenade launcher, which puts him in this defensive posture, so you can run past him that way. If I try to do it normally, the Tyrant X is one of the only, if not the only enemy in this game who can hit you when you have your back turned to him. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know specifically why that wasn't introduced to all the other ones, but it is what it is. Now, something I probably should have mentioned way sooner in this guide is the actual shooting mechanics behind the game. I touched on earlier how it was always intended for light gun, and so the fact that you have to use a controller to fire normally doesn't quite work as intended. And what I mean by that is that you've probably noticed that I very rarely go for headshots, and the main reason for this is that it's not efficient to, which sounds insane, but that is the case with this game. Whenever you fire a shot at the enemy, the reticle will automatically lock onto the center mass of the enemy, and hopefully, I mean, again, you can't tell as easily just from having watched it as if you played the game yourself, but every time you fire, it will move to the center mass and you'll be on your merry way. So the time it takes to fire a headshot, have the reticle move down to the center, have to move it back up again to fire again, is not worth just firing it quickly, especially given the fact that, as again, I was using my handgun for the majority of this playthrough. Ammunition is not a concern, and it's one of the it's a really bizarre one. I don't understand why they didn't introduce more quicker enemies in the game, or again, as I was mentioning earlier, ranged enemies to spice up the difficulty. Most of the zombies are just obstacles, and that's exactly what they are in the first few games of the series. They're not really threats. The threat that they pose is the fact that you have to expend resources to deal with them, or you have to try and run past them. If you no longer have the resources to have to worry about, they cease being a threat. They are, in this game, a nuisance. They're there. They don't pose any real threat to you unless you are a complete idiot and run into them. And I can certainly understand, you know, back in the PlayStation era, games weren't as prevalent as they are nowadays, and I can understand this game being made easier, you know, so everyone could play it, but it's again also strange because that's also an era notorious for bullshit mechanics and making the game really hard because they didn't have great game design. And certainly the first two Resident Evil games are not difficult games by any stretch of the imagination if you know what you're doing. If you don't, you can find yourself being killed quite quickly. And it's just, I find it really bizarre. This game is leagues easier than the first two. I mean, I was always, as a young child, puzzled by the traps, not the traps, the puzzles. Puzzled by the puzzles. Great use of verbiage there. Verbiage isn't even the right word. I sound like a pretentious twat. What I'm trying to say is I was a dumb kid, and a lot of the puzzles I couldn't get past, so I never got to complete them. In fact, the third one was the only one I completed because a lot of the puzzles were based more in real-world applications. Here's a hole, use the crank on the hole to open the shutter. As opposed to, here's a room with 8 portraits, you need to click them in the correct order. You know, but it's, considering you don't have the puzzles in this game, you would have thought they would have made the gameplay harder so that it lasts, or at the very least, they would have added more difficulty options. And I think that was why they put in the branching paths, try and get people to play it, because back in this sort of day, you could probably go out, you'd rent it for 2 days, you'd complete it in you complete it in like 2-3 hours, and you'd be like, oh, that's it, and return it. And it seems very strange to me that they did this in a game where rentals were much more common than they are nowadays, because I can imagine that had people done that, they rented the game, completed it, then handed it back in, they would have lost out on a huge amount of revenue there. And it just makes me feel, amongst a lot of other myriad problems of this game, that it was just thrown out there. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of love or attention to it. We've got the Resident Evil name, let's just slap it on any old thing and hope we can get a little bit of extra revenue from it without putting too much effort in, hence all the reused assets. Again, I can just speculate, but that's what it comes across as, and it's why it's not really remembered all that much. I mean, it's enjoyable enough. I had fun playing it. I wouldn't have made the walkthrough if I didn't. It's you know, there is joy to be had there, but considering how universally loved the first 3 Resident Evils are, and then compare it to this, it's a strange one. That's all I'm going to say. I don't really have more nuanced way of saying it. It's just a bizarre little game that came out. Maybe it was Capcom trying to test the waters a bit, experiment with different kind of areas. Again, maybe had the light gun come out and we played with the light gun, it would have been a far more enjoyable experience, but I don't think that would be the case, considering they made another similar game for Code Veronica and that was equally shit. Like I said, it wasn't until the Umbrella Chronicles that they actually got it right. So we're entering the final section of the game, as I was saying, Secret Laboratory. And again we have some reused enemies, these plant enemies that were present in the second game. And again, same with the Tyrant, they were a threat in the second game because they took so much damage. The only efficient way to kill them was with grenade flame rounds, which you kind of want to save, or a flamethrower, which meant you had to get up close, which put you at risk of the tentacles and the acid. And it just feels as if a lot of the assets from the previous games were used in this game without any real thought or rhyme or reason as to how and why they would be effective. It often just feels like they're thrown in here and you hope for the best. And it's a shame because I don't think this idea was inherently bad. I think there was a lot they could have done well with it. They just didn't.
They are creating these monsters on this island.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it almost feels as if the people making this one were huge fans of the Resident Evil games but weren't directly involved in making them. You have a lot of the elements that you would come to expect, you know, secret facility, the fact that there's all these creatures here, was try to explain away why the BOWs existed. Which again I have more problems with because as far as I'm aware, I believe between 4 to 6 Tyrants were dropped into Rackwell. Okay, I'm only referring to the original games. They may have added more in with all the shit spin-offs and the Raccoon City Chronicles and whatever. But in the original there was only 4 to 6 Tyrants dropped in. Why do they have so many here? When an entire city is being murdered because you fucked up, and that's gonna, you know, expose all of your shit, why do you not send more in? Are they not ready? I don't know. Because this happened around the same time Resident Evil 2. I believe it happened only a few weeks or months afterwards, so I have to believe they had them to a certain extent. I digress. Yeah, nice plot contrivance or convenience that the hunter pushed him off the edge so we could be the hero and save him, as opposed to doing what they just did in the first one, which was one hit kill you by ripping your head off. Maybe he was too short and the attack was meant to rip his head off, but it just went over. I don't have anything to say actually, this is just a... I'm actually uncertain if you can move in that section. I didn't try moving around, so I apologise, I failed the research in this particular area.
What? I'm sorry. Please forgive me.
What are you talking about? It's not your fault. Vincent is the one who caused everything. Well, I mean,
You? What do you mean? You're the detective. Your name is Art Thompson.
What? Really? I'm not Vincent? Then why did you run away from me?
Because I'm the one that told Vincent about you.
Hello, I'm Vincent. I've been transferred to this facility to inspect it.
Nice to meet you, sir.
I know Commander Vincent. So I knew that you weren't him when I saw you.
What? A spy? Thank you. You are a good boy, Lot.
So then I'm Ark and not Vincent. Lot, do you know of any way to get off this island?
My dad told me that there's a railway station up ahead from here.
A railway station?
I heard that it runs underground.
Okay, we'll use that. Let's go get Lily. Go ahead! Hurry! We'll meet at the station!
So we've just established
The self-destruction system has been
that
activated. This island will self-destruct in 10
there are monsters
minutes.
everywhere,
All the personnel must evacuate immediately.
and that this kid
Repeat. All the personnel evacuate immediately.
is absolutely in danger. So we're going to go send him, he doesn't even have his baseball bat this time, to go pick up Lily, run through the facility, run back here. Not only is he going to do that with the monsters around there, he's also going to do that in under 10 minutes. I have several questions at the validity of this.
That's right. At the request of my friend, Leon S. Kennedy, I came here to investigate. Oh, yes. I remember everything.
Tell me the truth. You are a spy, aren't you?
Yes, I'm not Vincent. I'm Ark.
So, first point. We are Ark Thompson, a friend of Leon S. Kennedy from the second game. We have been sent to investigate the island because of the shit that went down in Raccoon City, and we're trying to look into and dig up information about Umbrella. We also know that this game takes place in 1998. Around about and shortly thereafter the time of the Raccoon City incident. Leon S. Kennedy was a rookie cop in the second game on his very first day as a police officer. How the shit does he have a connection of a detective like Ark Thompson, considering we see in the second game that he literally hasn't even known the people then, unless we're led to believe that it's someone outside of his police connections. In which case, why didn't they make it so that Ark Thompson was a friend of Chris Redfield? We know he is a STARS member, or even Jill Valentine. We both know that they are STARS members. They are actually highly ranked. They have a higher position. Would it not have made more sense if they were affiliated with them, considering Chris in the later series, I mean obviously didn't know it at the time, would go on to try and hunt down Umbrella all over the world? Why didn't they make Ark affiliated with them instead, rather than the person who has just joined the police force, unless he was somehow knew him outside of his police duty? In which case I was like, it's awfully convenient that he happens to know a detective that can pilot a helicopter, because that's not the skills most detectives have. Unless it's the fact that he couldn't pilot and that's why it crashed, but then why would you try to fly it if you don't know how to fly it? And in the flashback, why is everything on fire already? What's going on? Are you going to explain it?
I'll kill you, Vincent.
I'm not Vincent.
Liar! Who else could you be? You are Vincent. You're a murderer. Now die! Why?
Now, one of the interesting things about this game, and one of the few times we'll say it's genuinely interesting, is that we've just seen the caretaker or the janitor, or I've blanked it because I don't care that much, get killed there. If you choose different paths, then Vincent, the guy who fell from the helicopter in the silver clothing, will end up being there instead. In fact, if you look this game up on Wikipedia and look at the plot analysis listed there, as of the time in which I'm recording this, I mean it may change, I doubt it, but it may, it will actually say that you come across Vincent there, where it actually changes based on the route that you take. I took the route to get this handgun, so he was there, and I'm assuming from this storyline canon, Vincent died in the car crash, helicopter fall, get it right, and yeah, he doesn't show up around here. The Tyrant we're fighting here, because you have to finish a Resident Evil game off with some kind of Tyrant fight, I believe it's called the Hypnos Tyrant, and he seems to be far stronger, although it's not perhaps still that easy to see with the way I'm just dispatched him, but he appears to be far stronger than most of the other Tyrants. And again, it's owed to the fact that in this game you are capable of killing things a lot easier, you're capable of firing a lot quicker, and you have a lot more ammunition, that the new enemies had to be scaled up to make it vaguely challenging. Because in the original Resident Evil, the Tyrant took, I think, 12 Magnum rounds and a rocket launcher to go down. This guy takes a lot more. But for those of you who have been astute to the fact that the self-destruct sequence was activated and it had 10 minutes, we have already spent 6.5 minutes since that was said. So we're going to die in like 3.5 minutes apparently. I mean, we're not, because there's no timer. There's literally no timer in this game whatsoever, which is always made me wonder, considering people can get backtracked and they can lose their way and people will be trying to think about it, why didn't they just say the self-destruct sequence has been activated, all personnel evacuate, and not mention the time frame? Because then you have the element of, oh shit, I don't know if it's going to blow up, I don't even know if there's a time limit going on right now.
Get on the train, hurry!
But when you're told it's a 10 minutes and 10 minutes passes and nothing happens, you're left going, and yeah, there is also a teleportation device at this facility, because again, Lot was able to get out of the facility, go to the house, pick up Lily, and be ahead of us before we got to the train, because fuck being consistent at this point, no one cares. No one gave a shit at this point in development. Either that, or they were just like, just give me my paycheck, I'm too coked out of my mind to think coherently. Now, this is one of the more bullshit regions of the game. When I make these walkthroughs, I don't always adhere to it, especially in certain cases, but I do my absolute best to try and do no-hit runs. And this section posed a significant problem for me, because at the moment there are 3 street sweepers on a bridge above us, and there's a number of street sweepers on the bottom. If we turn around, it is physically impossible to shoot all of them before they shoot you. So my method of getting through this is what you see here. Cheesing the fuck out of a stupid mechanic that shouldn't have been in the game. If you have your back to their machine guns, they cannot hurt you. It's like you have a large metal shield on the back. So you'll see me constantly walking backwards and just peeking out, and then when I hear a gun click, I turn my back again to keep myself protected. It's why I keep getting pushed forward. That's actually one of the enemies pushing me from behind into the wall. Yeah, it's really dumb. But yeah, I keep peeking out just to try and see it. And I believe I've got most of them here. I think there's just 1 or 2 left on the ground. If you keep moving back, there is a, like I said, there's a bridge over which they are above you. So you need to walk back to the point at which you hear the gun clicks, which indicates that you are directly under the bridge, and at which point you turn around and run for the train. Insanely stupid design. I don't know how it got past testing. I can only assume they didn't test it. Only explanation that springs to mind. So yes, we are at the end of the game. The self-destruct sequence is going to go off, as we saw from the cutscene, and as I was confused myself saying maybe he can't pilot a helicopter because that's why he crashed. No, he can absolutely pilot helicopters. That's how we're going to get off. It's super convenient that the only way to escape the island, we have just the necessary skills to use. I mean, again, this was made in Japan, so I'm just assuming every Japanese person has to learn piloting as part of their school curriculum. Only explanation I can think of on why they are misjudged with how the rest of the world does it. But yeah, we have the nice melancholic music playing. We have the 2 kids rescued. What could possibly go wrong? There's absolutely not going to be some big surprise at this totally non-generic game to make us go, oh, I didn't see that coming. Oh, the twist with the main character has already thrown me through a loop. I can't take it.
Get in the helicopter!
But yeah, the Tyrant's absolutely alive. And you will see he takes a significantly larger punishment than most of the other Tyrants. He will eat ammunition, which means in any other game he probably would have been a challenge. In this one he isn't. As with a lot of the other earlier games, I found fighting the creatures to be quite difficult, especially in the second one. If you watch my Leon B playthrough, I had an insane amount of time taking out the final Tyrant because the amount of recoil you get from firing a Magnum means that you can only fire that shot when the mutated Tyrant X is in a very specific animation, otherwise you will get a claw through the face. Here there's no such worries. Every time he comes close you just turn your back to him and he can't do shit. The biggest threat he has is the fact that he's a bullet sponge, and he does have a strange kind of organism's not right either, Jesus Christ. He does have a strange kind of organ on his chest. I do not know if that is the weak spot. I mean, I would have presumed it would be, that hitting him there does more damage, but I never noticed any difference in the damage he takes. So in this next stage is he has a new attack, and he also moves like a poorly rendered PlayStation character. It's like he's sliding on the ground on an ice rink than actually running. But yes, in this form he has a new attack. Even if you have your back or shoulder turned to him, he can grab you and he'll hoist you up into the air, which literally doesn't matter. All that he will do is if he holds you there long enough and you don't hurt him, then he will attack you. So whenever he does grab you, you just shoot at him as you have been this whole time, and he goes down without any problem. This fight is really not that difficult. I mean, it's easy enough to avoid him, but even if you didn't avoid him and you took damage, you will have so many healing items by this point that it doesn't matter. You could literally just grab all of your big weapons and just fire. You wouldn't even have to move, and I doubt you'd use up more than 1 or 2 herbs. It's really not really not a challenge. I mean, I imagine if someone was, again, maybe back in the day, if you're not I don't use the term real gamer because that's quite a nebulous term, but if you're not someone who plays a lot of video games, if you're not familiar with the mechanics, if you're not familiar with the controls, I can certainly see you maybe struggling a little bit. But for anyone who's played even a few games, this fight won't be a challenge, which is a shame because, like I said, the third one came out shortly after this and was a ball buster in comparison. The spike in difficulty was ludicrous. But yeah, we're just gonna wail away with whatever weaponry we have left. We do have grenade rounds, flame rounds, and acid rounds in this one. We don't have ice rounds. I don't believe they came in until Resident Evil 3, and I know the type of ammunition you get differs from game to game, certainly. You usually have the traditional grenade round, which I'm using here, which itself has gone through a few iterations actually. In the first one it was just a straight shot. You hold it, you fire, and it goes in a straight line. And then in the third one it had more of an AoE effect, like a fragmentation grenade, and here it does the same thing. But yep, we use an acid round, which does a lot of damage to living things, as Ray Burton would say, and he's down for the count. And that's the final challenge here. It's quite reminiscent of the first game where you have to fight the Tyrant on the helipad. So you could argue it's a bit of a throwback. I honestly say it's more laziness than a throwback.
Seconds to detonation. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We're safe.
It can't be! Get down!
What are we gonna do, mister?
Yeah. What are we gonna do?
I don't know, but don't worry. We can fly as long as we have fuel.
And with that, we have finished Resident Evil Survivor. And Ark, Thompson, Lot, and Lily are never mentioned again in Resident Evil canon, unless there's an Easter egg or a file I've missed. I'm pretty sure most of the staff at Capcom just preferred this game didn't exist. It's, I mean, it's sad. It's, because there's definitely potential here, but it's just buried under so much rock that it's hard to find. I had a point to say and I've completely blanked it. Yes, this was my first commentary and I do apologise, it probably wasn't the most professional I've done. I haven't done one before. It's not the most professional, but it is a work in progress, and with luck, if I do a commentary again, I would like to do more of these. With luck, I'll have other people to talk alongside me so they can feel the silence when my brain decides to stop working. This game, when it came out to relatively lukewarm reviews, if all of my ranting surprised that even in the slightest. I think it averaged around 4 or 5 stars out of 10, which I would give it around about that kind of ballpark. Like, it's not horrible and it's not great. It's serviceable. It does the job. And I know when I was going through it I was ranting quite a lot, but I have to also remember it came out in the 90s. The standard wasn't quite as high back then. And yeah, I mean, it was my intention to go through this and kind of talk about game design and plot reasons, and I realised it did just become an angry rant for quite a bit of it about all the problems it had. I mean, that's kind of critiquing it because there is a lot of problems there. I mean, the good points are that it plays, it works as a game, and if you've got literally nothing else to do, it's not hard to emulate it, and you can kill an hour and a half. There are worse ways to spend your time, but it's also not something I would particularly go out and say, oh, you have to experience this, which is why it's here on YouTube. You can watch it if you've got literally nothing else to do. Anyway, I hope the commentary you found somewhat useful, maybe a little bit insightful, maybe a bit funny. Maybe it was just a nice podcast for you to fill some of the silence whilst you worked on something else, because I know a few friends of mine who actually watched my whole videos and I think they're mad. Think of it as a giant pizza. You have a little bit and you come back to it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I wish you a wonderful day.